Alright, our next episode is entitled The Schizoid Man. It's episode number 32. It originally aired on January 21st, 1989. It was written by Tracy Torme, and the story was by Hans Beimler and Richard Manning, and directed by Les Landau. Okay, and plot-wise with this episode, the Enterprise is responding to a distress call from a planet that's inhabited only by Dr. Ira Graves and his assistant, Kareem Brianin. Those are the only two people on the planet. Now, Dr. Graves is considered by some to be the greatest human mind alive, and has been working on bridging the gap between biological and machine intelligence. While they're on their way there, the Enterprise receives another distress call, and this time it's from a transport ship. So that what they decide to do is to drop off an away team, which includes Data, Troy, Worf, and a Vulcan medical doctor named Solar, at Graves' world, and then they warp to assist the ship. Now, while they're on the planet, Dr. Solar soon establishes that Graves is dying. And while they're waiting for the Enterprise to return, Data and Graves become close, and they start chatting. And Graves reveals that he knew Dr. Soong, Data's creator, very well. So that especially intrigues Data, and they develop quite a rapport. Their rapport grows to the point that Data even tells Graves about his off button, which is interesting because, as you may recall, he only told Dr. Crusher in the first season, but apparently he's expanding that now. Now suddenly, Graves sees an opportunity to continue his life. So just as the Enterprise returns, Data walks out of Graves' office and announces that Graves is dead and that he died in his arms. The away team returns with Miss Brianin and Graves' body, and a short time later, Data begins acting very strangely, pretty irrationally, and he even displays some intense emotion, very atypical of him. Now, after both physical and mental testing, Picard realizes that Graves transferred his intellect into Data before he died. The two different personalities are battling in Data's body, and Graves is actually winning the fight. In addition, Graves doesn't know how to control Data's great strength. So even when he gets upset by such things as being jealous about his assistant Kareem talking to Captain Picard, Graves feels that Picard is interested in Kareem in more of a professional level, and he snaps at Picard and becomes insubordinate. And as he loses his temper, somebody always seems to get hurt. For example, in engineering, Picard finds that Graves has beaten up LaForge and an ensign. And based on this and Data's right to exist, Picard argues for Graves to leave Data's body. But Graves is unrepentant and becomes angry and strikes Picard, and that renders him unconscious. So Graves basically witnesses his latest accident and decides that he needs to reconsider his actions. So what he does is he transfers himself out of Data and into the computer, and after this, Data returns back to normal. And that is the plot of this particular episode. Now, I wanted to read a little selection from you from a book I have called Captain's Logs. It's a pretty old book. It came out around the time that Voyager was just coming out. But it has some great stuff about behind the scenes about TNG. If you don't have this book, I encourage you to get it. It's still really good. And I wanted to read a little excerpt that Tracy Torme wrote, who wrote this episode. And it's interesting because the original plot for this was totally different than it is now. So I'll read that just right now. He says, I had wanted to do a story about Data having hidden memories of the dead colonists from the planet he came from. A woman comes aboard who once had a triangular love affair with these two men from the colony. Their memories instantly come alive in Data whenever he sees her, and their personalities basically take him over. One was an Italian Don Juan type, and the other was a sort of overzealous and very jealous kind of nerd, so Data would suddenly break into these personalities and become very jealous, possessive, amorous, or whatever, around this woman. I couldn't do it because Richard Manning and Hans Beimler already had a story they had sold about genius Ira Graves and how he ends up transmitting his intellect into Data. So what we ended up doing, when Richard and Hans were not going to work on the show for whatever reason, was I combined the two stories. I used Ira Graves as a character and the setting on his planet, and put a lot of elements from my story into it. In their story, the scientist puts his intellect into Data, and everyone knows about it ahead of time. So when he comes on board, it's not a secret that there's somebody else inside Data. That made the whole story play differently. So that was one of the major changes. A lot of the specifics from the show were taken from my original idea. It was a story I wanted to do, and I wanted to do it for Brent, who I admire a great deal. This was really the only way I could do it. So pretty interesting. He kind of had his own story in mind, which had a little more backstory about Data and the colonists, and fused it into this episode. So it's kind of interesting to see the writing process and how that takes place. Now, Maurice Hurley, who also worked on the show, really didn't like this episode at all. He called it science fiction bullshit, actually. But the reason why he said that is because he didn't feel like it was appropriate for Data's character to allow him to be somebody else. He felt that really hurt the character, and it really damaged him because Data was not acting like Data. Which I totally disagree with. I mean, this is, even though it was Data's body, this was not Commander Data at all. And, this was Dr. Graves infused in Data and basically taking over his personality. So Data doesn't cease to be the Data we know. He doesn't change his personality. It's just this is another entity inside of him. So you can kind of use that science fiction logic to allow for that. But I don't think it takes away from Data at all. As you see at the end of the episode, Data just becomes himself at the end, so he's back to his normal self. So I think it's just kind of a chance to see, and to give Brent a chance to act with emotions, even though Data doesn't really have them. So I think that's kind of interesting, and I really like, if you look at this picture here, this is a picture of Data giving a farewell speech to Dr. Ira Graves. And at that time, Graves is actually inside Data's mind. And it's pretty hilarious, his speech. And in fact, this scene is used many times in some recuts, funny recuts of The Next Generation by a guy named Major Grin on YouTube. If you've never seen any of his recuts, definitely watch those. They're hilarious. But he uses this quite a bit. And he basically just pastes whoever's picture he wants in that torpedo tube, and Data gives a little speech for him. And it's just so much fun. I obviously enjoyed this episode. I'd like to know your thoughts. Comment below whether you thought it was a great episode or not. Please tell me why. We can have some good dialogue going with that. And if you do like these reviews, I encourage you to share them. And also, please go to my YouTube and become a subscriber so you can make sure you get all these episodes. My name is Bob the Business Builder on YouTube. Just look for that and you'll be able to find me. And thanks for watching, guys.